Hi guys, welcome to Fierce and Pretty and welcome to the cottage. This is the first time I've been able to sit down, take my camera with me, and I thought that I might use this opportunity to film a next episode on the Witchcraft book series. But instead of talking about those old books that I said I would the last time, I wanted to do a special episode here. And unfortunately, all of these books that I'm talking about, 3 books today, and all of them are out of print. But if anybody's interested, you might still you could still find these in libraries or get used copies, because I managed to get one. So maybe if anybody's interested, you can too. All of the 3 books that we're covering today are about people or the practices of Alexandrian Wicca or Alexandrian line of witchcraft. So let's start from the oldest one. And the first book we're talking about today is from 1969, and it's King of the Witches by June Johns. It is a small book, an old paperback with really tainted yellow-brown pages, but I managed to find it in a really good condition. And the author of this book, June Johns, was a reporter. So that's the background. But the book is a biography of the founding father of the Alexandrian branch of Wicca, or Alexandrian witchcraft, however you prefer to say it. So this is a short story of the man himself, Alexander's, who got named the King of the Witches back in the day. So Alexander's, he died in 1988, and it was the 30th of April, so we just passed that day, kind of anniversary of his death, not so long ago. And what I think about this book was that it was highly interesting. It's heavily based on the time period. You can kind of sense the old vibes in it, but you need to take it with a grain of salt, because most of the things that Alexander himself said, nobody knows where's the truth in that. But also, when it's written by somebody else, you never know what's the hardcore truth. But even still, I kind of read this book like a novel, and with that perspective, it was really interesting. I think it was a nice way to get into that time frame when Wicca was just becoming a thing, and how this man Alexander's kind of explains his path from his initiation from his grandmother, all those wild stories there, but then towards working with people, finding other witches, performing, creating his coven, meeting his wife Maxine Sanders, and interesting stories, and kind of it gives you the feel into what it must have been in the early days when witchcraft was kind of becoming what it is now, after the Gardnerians started it from the 50s. And the biggest thing that Alexander's kind of did, what also divides people's opinions about him really strongly, is that he was really, really public about it. Of course, Gerald Gardner did a lot of bringing Wicca or witchcraft into the public eye, and interviews and writing books. But Alexander's took it to a whole nother level. And it was such an interesting read, and to imagine how they did all these TV, performances, rituals in front of cameras, just to as staged setups, not like doing real magic and all these big scandals that coming out as witches was considered back then. So as a piece of history, I found this book really interesting. But I think anybody who is interested, not specifically about Wicca even, I think this is a good book to read to get the idea of the time frame, and because it's the close history of witchcraft. It's not the ancient history that we have on the witch trials and things like that, but even the things that these people had to go through in not so long ago, because some of you watching there were even, you can remember 70s and those times. I'm born in the 80s, so I'm quite close. But I like the book. Let's just take a quick close-up for these books. So, it's an old paperback, and I love how yellow all the pages are. And this just feels... I was trying to be really careful while reading it. But here we see the content of this book. This goes kind of from the childhood of Alexander's and then how his journey evolves. But it doesn't go really far into the time period. It kind of... Maxine Sanders, for example, enters the book kind of late. And that's why I think it's nice to have the more modern biography of Alexander's also, A Coin to the Ferryman, so it kind of gives something more. So with the second book, let's jump ahead a few years into the year of 1971. And this book is What Witches Do, a Modern Coven Revealed by Stuart Farrar. From this book, they've made printouts in 71, 83 and 91. So mine is the third edition. So there are 2 earlier editions of this book. But Stuart Farrar, if anybody has read The Witch's Bible, that is written by Stuart and Janet Farrar. So he's that guy, and he was a student of Alexander's. And I think once again this book is a product of its time period. So they might not always be the most politically correct these days, but I actually found this book a lot more fluent to read and a lot nicer flow in the text than in the Witch's Bible. Of course they are separate things, but when it comes to the writing, I was surprised how easy this book was to read and how fast I read it. And I actually highly liked this book. So what's the case with that book is that when Stuart Farrar was a journalist or reporter, or what you might call making news and stories, and then he started to make a piece about the Alexandrian or the witches at that time. And in that process, while he was writing the book about the coven, he got initiated. And this book is creation during his first year, from initiation into his first year. And it goes through all the, very basic structures of that many witchcraft books do nowadays. And they are the basis of Wiccan witchcraft in this book. But also there is a lot of kind of, I think, personal depth when it comes to adding things about Alexander's or Maxine Sanders in this book. So I think this combination and how I read these 3 books kind of made a nice whole package around those people and what they were doing, and all of them kind of are complementary for each other. And What Witches Do by Stuart Farrar. So my edition came in with paper covers. This is how the book looks underneath. And it is written for Alex Maxine and their daughter Maya. The content of this book, it starts from initiation, then it goes the roots of modern Wicca, what witches believe, training of a witch, the coven at work, the great rite, the seasonal festivals, so the Sabbats, talks about clairvoyance, then tarot and the tree of life, which I found also really interesting. Then there's a chapter about magic, healing, wells of the elements, astral projection. And when it comes to astral projection, for example, this book is highly practical also. There are things to do, which is kind of, I think, advanced in a book this age. And when we're talking about Tree of Life, we have pictures here to help if you're not familiar with the Tree of Life. We have an example of a pentacle. Then we have illustrations like from creating the circle, inscriptions for athames. But this book kind of surprised me positively, because I thought, well, sometimes these older books can be drier reads, but this wasn't. It was an easy read, and I really enjoyed it. Then the 3rd book, and this is not old, this is actually quite new. It was first printed out in 2007, and mine is the 2nd edition of 2008. But still, you can find this book somewhere, but not, in bookstores anymore, but used copies. It's called Firechild by Maxine Sanders. So Maxine was Alex Sanders' wife, or his 2nd wife. Maxine was Alex's high priestess in the coven, and then when they kind of separated, somewhere in between, Maxine started to run the London coven. This was a perfect balance of reading kind of from Alexander's perspective on the things, and then reading Maxine's, perspective on things. And once again, you always get one side of the story, but when you get enough sides from different stories, then you can, create your own opinion, and nobody cares what is, super true or not true. I think this book is a really interesting read of a story of a young girl becoming a witch and a high priestess in the religion of witchcraft in the period of time when things weren't as open and accepted as they are nowadays. And it's really interesting to read about the people's reaction, even, in the 60s and in the 70s. So it's not that long ago, and see how, how hard it has been and how brave these people have been living their own path, and how kind of Alex and Maxine were doing so much work to, it's a tremendous thing that what they did when we think about what is the status of Wicca today, when we have it in some countries as a registered religion. So all the work that they did, no matter how controversial it was and how many publicity stunts were included, but they really made a change in a world, and a permanent change. And why I really loved this book was because it's written by Maxine Sanders herself. So I think that's always the best way of reading people's life stories when they are written by themselves. Of course, there are things that how you have felt things and remember things, these change, but I think that's the preferred way when it comes to life stories like this one. And it's not, it isn't an easy book to read. She has had a hell of a life. We start from her childhood with an abusive father with sexual abuse and like really sad and painful things, and how openly she's sharing those experiences just, I think, reflect how much growth and work with herself she has done during her life as a witch, because that's what she has been all of her adult life, a witch, an initiate in the traditional initiatory religion of witchcraft. And Maxine Sanders is only one of these characters that are still alive. So Alex Sanders is dead. Also Stuart Farrar has passed already. So I have been watching Maxine's interviews on YouTube, and I don't know, she's such a poised and calm, and her presence and the way she talks is amazing. And having that kind of live reference about her as a person, I think deepened my reading experience about this book. But I think that if you would read just only one of these books, I think this is a highly interesting book to anybody who's interested in witchcraft, no matter on what are your opinions about Wicca per se. I think this is the most, of all these three, kind of giving an idea and a glimpse of history around witchcraft. And what I love about my copy, because I bought it used, but I was surprised because it even has Maxine's signature. Okay, it's not written for me, it's for somebody called Lee, but here is the signature of Maxine Sanders. And even though all these books are really like treasures to me when I found them, and I'm so happy to have them, but having her, you know, her signature here makes it, you know, even more special. Here's the signature, and as you can see, this book, it is a novel. It's not a practical book about witchcraft, but it is a story of their life. But it has these awesome old black and white pictures from things that they did. So I think it brings all the characters alive to see them here. So I really like having photos in biographies, and photos that I've never seen anywhere before, like this one where Alexander is looking like a monk and totally bald. Is not a picture that you normally are used of seeing about him. And this book is over 300 pages, so it's a dense book, but totally worth reading. Out of these three, it's hard to pick out my favorite, but this might be my first favorite, then kind of What Witches Do, and then last the June Johns about Alexander's. But I think these three made a beautiful combo altogether. So, but here were some out of print books about Alexandrian witchcraft. that I will treasure, and I was really happy to read them. And just in case anybody who's interested can find these online, search on eBay and used book sites and wherever, do your Google search. I managed to find these quite easy and with reasonable prices, so there's still hope, and there's always libraries. But I'll try to do the next episode on the older books around witchcraft. This was just a spontaneous episode because I'm reading these, and I just started another biography of Alexander's, A Coin to Ferryman by Yimaldi Fiosa, and that book is still available in eBay in Amazon and everywhere. So that's a current book about Alexander's if you can't find the King of the Witches. So that's another choice. But I've just started that, so I'm not including it in here, and because it's not an out-of-print book. But until next time, I'm gonna keep on enjoying the cottage. Bye guys!